my start in computers in 1967 in an IBM 360-67 at the University of British Columbia, and I remember nothing about Fortran 4 or assembler. Well, almost nothing. 29 years of policing experience gave me an idea of how to conduct an investigation, and in the last few years I've discovered that doing private investigations is interesting work. It's complicated work, and it's made complicated, of course, by people. Otherwise it'd be very simple. But I've also found that you can't touch a human being today without touching the internet and without touching a computer somehow. And it became increasingly important to be able to merge the two sets of skills, if you will. This person who usually does this presentation is Dale Jackman of Amuleted Security, Computer Security, and he and I have formed a bit of a partnership to do investigations. He did investigations for a long time. He was in the IT world forever, and then he got the idea that he'd like to do forensic type investigations on computers and do evidentiary work for courts. And so he took the private investigators course in British Columbia and is now a licensed private investigator. And he's built a business around that, because as it turns out, a lot of people know a lot about computers, but they don't know a lot about law. They don't know a lot about putting what they find in a computer into a format that police, crown, or civil lawyers can take to court and prosecute or build a case around. And so he brought me into a couple of investigations, and I brought him into a couple of investigations, and we're working in large corporations, and we're finding that what we're facing are not very simple things. They're not discrete anymore. They're very, very international. In the most recent case we have, there's 3 countries involved, and every time we move or want to do something, we have to clear it with lawyers from 3 different countries, because all 3 countries' laws may apply. And in the United States, they get really, really antsy about this stuff. There's something called the Lacey Act in the United States, which really applies to resources. But it says that if you commit a crime in another country, do something that in another country is a crime, it's considered a crime in the United States as well. And although that may have limited application, unfortunately in the United States sometimes these things tend to broaden out. So they start to say, you had a private investigator tape record a conversation with one of your employees without his knowledge? Well, you can't do that in the United States. And so they get really worried about stuff like that. You can do it in Canada. Oddly enough, police can't do it, but a private investigator can, and a private citizen can as well. Police are restricted in what they can record, even with one-party consent. So in this case, we found that almost every sort of traditional investigative mode was blocked. We weren't allowed to do surveillance on people, and we went into this company about 8 or 9 months ago, and the company had thought that they had some IT people who had gone rogue on them, and had I know this is anathema to most of you here, but they had some IT people, and they kept them on the books for 7 months after they told them they were phasing out their job. Normally it's a box, and please leave with us. In this case, they did that. So they had some reason to believe that the problems they were facing, which were intrusions into their computer system, spoofing emails, were related to these 2 individuals. And the cybercrime side of it started about 8 or 9 months ago, and went on and really wasn't making much progress. And I came into it about 3 months ago and looked at it and said, you need to take something from the police world, and that's called major case management. Because what you're doing here is you're looking at individual aspects of this cybercrime, if you will, and you're rooting down into operating systems, you're looking for logs, you're discovering that the company doesn't have in place the types of things that let you find out who did what when. In fact, this particular company had no backups, multinational company, no backups. They were using Google as their email in the corporate world, a horrendous mistake. And they were had no logs anywhere. So, and no surprise, almost everybody in the company had acquired the super user password for the network. So it was a nightmare, to say the least. And so when the cyber guys went in, the first thing they did was to try and re-engineer or reverse engineer the entire network and the entire system that they had going in 3 countries to figure out, you don't know where to start unless you know how this thing works. And so they had to re-engineer it. But they got so bogged down in the re-engineering of it that they forgot that at the end of the day, there's a human being at the end of this problem. And how do you get to that human being? And so when I came in, I said, we need to apply some major case management tools here, and let's start timelining all of these events, and let's start to understand them in context. And I don't pretend to know the cybercrime side to any degree. I have enough knowledge that I can float terms in the room here. But if you try to pin me down, I will writhe like a worm on a hook and try and get away, because I don't really have that level of knowledge. But I work with people that do have that level of knowledge. And so when I say, where did this email come from? And they look at it and say, well, let's look at the header. Okay, I can pull a header. I know how to look at a header. And I can kind of read it. It doesn't make any sense to me to do it in reverse order, but okay, I can do that. I like to read chronologically. But computer guys seem to read in every direction possible. I guess it comes from learning hexadecimal. That just bends my head. So they look at this thing and they say, well, it doesn't come from anywhere because it comes from Google, because Google strips everything out. So there's no way of telling where the hell this thing came from. And so we put all those to one side, and by now there was probably 15 or 20 different Gmail accounts that were coming into this company and spoofing different things. Sometimes they were pretending to be sincere, sometimes they were pretending to be funny, and sometimes they were outright rude, vulgar, and obscene. And then they started making them so that they committed a crime. And the crime was identity fraud. So when you take Jim's name and you put it onto the front end of a Google account and you call it Jim's Noise at gmail.com, but you put your name on it, that becomes an identity fraud, and so it does become a crime. The company called the police in, and the police took one look at it and said, we can't handle this. We can't do this. And so we're finding in this private investigation world that we're starting to get more and more companies coming to private investigators, forensic accountants, certified fraud examiners, because the police don't have the resources to handle these types of crimes. And there's big money involved. Had one out in Lower Mainland, $400,000 internal theft. And the police took one look at it and said, go hire a PI, because when they can build a case and bring it back to us, and we'll try and prosecute this. So it's becoming very interesting out there. So we're international in nature. Then there's a question of who actually investigates, and it's turning out that the police aren't doing it anymore. They will do it, because I just took 2 weeks ago 2 sets of binders, 750 pages of documentation, and 48 pages of draft report explaining this particular crime to the police, and they have jumped on it. When I say jumped on it, it's been 2 weeks now, because they have to do an application to obtain a search warrant, and that takes 32 pages, the officer's up to now, of drafting. That draft then has to go to an officer who's not involved in the case, who has to review it and see if it makes sense to him. And after that, it has to go to a supervisor, and only then does it get taken to a judge to issue a warrant. In this particular case, the person has been doing everything from the one of these bring your own nightmare devices into the workplace, which is connected to their network, although he's really smart. He didn't connect it to the network. He does everything not on their network, and this is the device he uses to cause chaos in this company. He made a mistake, though. When you do enough Gmail accounts, there's a little trick in Google you can do, or in Gmail, and that's to go looking for your password. And if you do, it gives you a clue as to the rescue password or rescue phone number. And so when 1 or 2 come back to, usually what you get is a character, 10 asterisks, another character at gmail.com. When 2 or 3 of them come back to the same, let's just call it A1, you're sort of thinking, big deal. When 15 of them come back to A1, you're thinking, okay, these are all related. So now we've got a relationship, and this is where the major case piece comes in. You have to do the timelines, you have to do the charting, you have to flow chart things, you have to do all of the things that IT people do, but you're doing it from a different perspective. You need to avoid institutional bias. We see investigations that are done in-house, and it's really hard for an IT person who's approached by the CEO to resist being told, we think Joe has done such and such with his email, give me all his email. And there's some rules around what kind of email you can get at from an employee, and the basis for going after those. There are privacy laws around here. Even if you've signed off your life to get into the company's corporate network, you still have some rights to some privacy. And depending on which country you are in, those rights may be more extreme even than Canada's or British Columbia's. So avoiding the institutional bias of saying, we think this guy's guilty, go convict him. We're telling companies now, you really need to bring outside people in who don't have a bias, who can look at this thing with a neutral eye. And as I said, we're finding that the police really can't do these types of things. He doesn't like me. I should make a sound here. Oh, you're going to make me look stupid. Thanks. So it's no longer just IT that we're doing senior investigations. It's no longer just interviewing people that private investigators tend to do. It's an array of skills from cybercrime stuff. In this recent one, they went in with infrared devices and nonlinear junction detectors to see if, because they thought that the previous IT people had planted bugs, because they seemed to know way too much about what was going on. And if we brought in a person who had mental health training to think about this, and the first thing that she said was, it's not anybody outside. They're sending all these emails into this company. There's got to be somebody there to enjoy the impact of those emails coming in, because nobody's responding to them. So what's the likelihood that somebody on the outside, after 7 or 8 months, is still sending spoofing emails, is still going onto the web, and finding a way to use my phone number to send Jim a text message from me that looks like it came from me because it's my phone number. But you can do that on the web now. You can also send an email in somebody else's name. mk.cz is in the checklist of the Republic, a server out of Norway. So you have to start understanding UTC time codes. I didn't really understand them, but when you start to look at time codes on headers of emails, you start to realize that this starts to make sense. What do you mean it came in at 3 o'clock in the morning? Nobody was at work. Well, it didn't come at 3 o'clock in the morning. It came in during the workday. And then you look further in the major case management sort of thing, and you realize that all these emails are coming in Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. Who does that except an employee? And that sort of, it took us along the road to finding this guy, because we started looking inside. And nobody looked like a good suspect, because everybody seemed to be working hard. There was all kinds of computer problems. Computers were crashing and crashing and crashing. One particular computer was found to be infested with something called a logic bomb. I'd never heard of a fork bomb or a logic bomb, but it's about this much code. It starts with a colon and an S and a % sign and an S and something else. And then what it does is it's kind of a local denial of service attack. It opens every program on the machine and bogs the machine down to nothing. And it was found in the accounting software of this company, and they thought that it was first it was a piece of rogue code in the accounting software, but it clearly wasn't after a while, because it came up as fork bomb, and then we found it littered throughout the network and this particular machine. So the array of skills to do this, to walk into a company and not make mistakes and not go off in the wrong direction, means that you need to somehow marry the IT stuff with the classic investigation stuff. And the classic investigation stuff took us to a Facebook site, which may not sound classic because it sounds more like social media investigation. And this person got so arrogant that they did a post on this social media site. In order to do a post on Facebook, you have to have a Facebook site. And the Facebook site was had an interesting picture on it. And as you know, if you go to Google and you take the picture and you throw it into Google Image, it will pop up where it's seen that photo before. And that photo belonged to a very famous internet developer. And so it clearly wasn't him. And oddly enough, the name that was being used had shown up in one of these spoofed emails. And lo and behold, we tracked that back to this person liked something that we tracked to another Facebook site that went to a blog that came up with, and this is the part I love best. My son's grade 8 math solved this case because this person used a web name, 7 characters, upper and lower case. So if you do the math on that, that's 52 to the 7th power, or in order to randomly come up with that 7-character name, it's a 1 in 1,024,000,000,000 chance of doing that. And that name came up in association with another name that had come up in a Gmail account, and that was 11 characters. And again, if you do the math on that, it was all lowercase, so it was 26 to the 11th power. Probability theory, you multiply those two together, big number. So the chances of those two things happening randomly was just about 0. And for them to happen randomly for this company and to be associated to this person's name was a pretty good indicator that this was the person. So would we have got that through sheer cybercrime investigation or sheer brute force interviewing of people? No. It was a marriage of the two that brought the investigation together. Quoting from Alexander Pope, a little learning is a dangerous thing, but a lot of ignorance is just plain stupid. And so you need to know a lot about the other person's work. I need to know a lot about cybercrime work, and the cybercrime guys need to know a lot about my kind of work in order for this to work. You know, like which techniques do we employ at what time? IT people really need to know about the law. The number of IT people that are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, that are breaches of privacy, is kind of interesting. The number of human resource investigators who are not licensed, who are doing investigations, is really interesting. There's some value as IT people in getting private investigation licenses so you can do things legally. I see. And these crimes are now international in nature. We're finding that it's private investigators and IT people who are doing the investigations for police, and that you have to walk in there and avoid the institutional bias. And the police are there. They will help, but you need to put it together for them. It needs to be put together in a way that they can understand. So when I had a timestamp difference between an email header and an email account that was extraction from the Gmail server, and it was an hour out, didn't make any sense to me. And in order to show this person was at their computer at the time that a logic bomb was loaded, I had to show that they were active on that computer at the time on their account. Well, I didn't understand it. Somebody here probably does, but apparently Google counts time from 1601, January 1st, midnight, to the present, and they do it in seconds, and so some million seconds per year. And that was the explanation why the two numbers were out. I still don't understand it, and so I have to go back to them and say, okay, I'm a cop, you know, and I kind of understand how cops think. If you can't explain it to them, then they're not going to buy this. So, just a few examples of how cybercrime and classic investigation pieces come together. It's no longer Mickey Spillane, you know, a jaw connected to a fist connected to a gun. It's a little more sophisticated than that. And as somebody pointed out here, and my wife always points out, I don't do domestic investigations because by the time you're hiring a PI to check on your spouse, you know all you need to know about them.